What a lovely passage we have today. Where indeed is the good news in this gospel text? Herod gets drunk at his party, makes a crazy promise, and John the Baptist loses his head. Absolute power corrupting absolutely. This is great stuff for a movie. Not so much a sermon. So, there is the obvious moral lesson in this text, which is, of course, don't make outrageous promises in front of your guests if you don't really want to do something. It's a good lesson. And the other, more importantly, never, ever behead a prophet. Two good life lessons. Or as we learned from the kids this morning, don't give in to peer pressure. That's pretty straightforward. And there is a silver lining in that in this message this morning, in that Herod said he did feel bad, right, about beheading John the Baptist. I don't think John the Baptist really cared that he felt bad, though. I don't think that helped much. So, no, it is hard to see the good news in this passage, which I think is the point. I think that's the point. The gospel message as a whole is one of God's power coming into the world through Christ, bringing the good news of God's kingdom. And what we have in this section of the gospel is this flashback story of the powers of this world without Christ in it. It's the Good Friday before Easter. And it shows us the powers of the world that continue to wreck our world today. A lobbyist once said that there are two forces that control Washington: fear and greed. And at least it's good to know that things have not changed a whole lot since Herod's time, right? The root of Herod's power is in both of those, fear and greed. He fears looking foolish in front of his guests, and he is greedy to maintain his position of power. For Herod, the root of his power is in the preservation of his self. The root of power in this story is not in God's kingdom. It's rooted in vanity and self-preservation, which luckily none of us struggle with ever, right? None of us ever struggle with that. No, we all struggle with that, with self-preservation, about being selfish. The problem with a story like this, however, is I think we often tune it out because it's such an extreme example. It's an unlikely situation for us to find ourselves in. At least I'm hoping that's the case. I hope you're never put in this situation. Someone once told me that as soon as you bring up Adolf Hitler in a conversation, no matter the context, the conversation's pretty much over. Because it's such an extreme example of something, it's hard to kind of really relate. Herod and his wife behave so selfishly that John the Baptist is killed unceremoniously for them just to save face. It's a story of extreme power being used for extremely poor purposes. But even though our circumstances will likely not put us in the exact same situation, we are challenged by the same temptations every day with power. And the temptation is to use what power we have for self-preservation and vanity. We all have the power to change and influence the lives of those around us, both negatively and positively. The answer is, what do we do with power? Is not just pretend that we don't have any or pass it off. I would call that false humility, right? Saying that, oh, well, I don't have any power. That's false humility. The answer is to be honest about where we do have power in this world, especially as it relates to power in influencing others. I think we have a lot of false humility in the Lutheran Church, honestly, and I would put myself in that category. I don't know where it came from, and for the most part, I do appreciate kind of the understated way Lutherans act. Right? We've got one of the biggest world relief organizations, but nobody knows about it. Let's not tell them what good work we're doing, you know. And maybe it isn't Lutheran. It might be a Midwest thing, and just the fact that, you know, a lot of Lutherans live in the Midwest. Maybe it's a cultural thing. Garrison Keillor, I think, put it best when he said, it's the land where the introverts look at their shoes and the extroverts look at other people's shoes. All right, maybe not related to the topic. I was just thinking of it as I was reading it. But the point being that that's not humility. You know, saying that you don't have power is not what God's after. That's not humility. What is true humility is acknowledging what power and gifts God has given each of you and choosing to use them in God's kingdom instead of self-preservation. And to serve the power of God's kingdom, even when it goes against what feels like the natural thing to do. I think we can actually relate to Herod's situation, right? He was kind of put on the spot. He didn't want to lose face. He didn't want to be embarrassed. Herod was afraid of losing his power and his influence. And even though he was the head honcho of the town, right? He's King Herod. You wouldn't think he'd care what other people thought. We know that there's no such thing as a permanent earthly power. Even Rome fell, right? Leaders changed constantly. And there are winners and there are losers when we look at the powers that are in our world. And we feel the pressure to try and align ourselves with the winning side. It's better to be in power than to be the powerless. And once you accept power as the most important thing in life, though, whether it's wealth or influence or self-preservation, you're always vulnerable to those with more power, right? Why would King Herod be afraid of what people thought? But Jesus offers a different way to live. Jesus offers a different way. Jesus doesn't shirk power, does he? He just shirked the type of power that was about fear and greed and self-preservation. The power that Satan tempted Jesus with in the wilderness. In God's kingdom, we have to give up our illusion that if we just have enough money, if we just have enough influence, or if we just have enough control in our life, that we will be okay, that our lives will be okay. Power in itself is neutral. But if you can't articulate your root of power, then your power has the potential to disempower. So I'll say that again because I liked it, but it was kind of a lot of things. Power in itself is neutral. But if you cannot articulate the root of your power, then your power has the potential to disempower, and especially to disempower others. For example, if the root of our power is self-preservation, itself is, we need to make sure we preserve ourselves in some ways, then it is likely that the need to control others or have enough stuff to preserve our well-being or be in the right position to preserve our interests would usurp the mercy or the needs of others. That is what I would call head on a plate power. That is power apart from Jesus' power. God's power, on the other hand, is for the sake of the other. Right? It's always for the other. It's self-giving. It's in the hope of relationship. It turns outward. God's power is for the sake of love. And trusting that is enough. In essence, we're using our power for others in God's kingdom, trusting that if we are part of God's kingdom, that is enough. When you put it that way, the choice seems simple, doesn't it? Do I want to be John the Baptist, or do I want to be Herod? But it's something we need to be constantly reminded of. Because I think what is harder than not succumbing to the misuse of power is acknowledging that we do have power to begin with, and to not shy away from it out of fear. Because when we do that, we are unconsciously giving over to the powers of this world. Because we're afraid of what we might do wrong if we admit we have power. Right? I think that's it. And I think even more, we're afraid of what great deeds we might do if we're honest about the power we've been given to do good in this world. What if people recognize this church as being leaders in the community? What if people recognize the power of grace, of dignity, of mercy, of respect? What might happen? You might be taken advantage of. You might be called weak. You might be thrown in jail. Or even worse, you might give up your life for others. The reason it is hard to use the power we have been given to stand up for the rights of others, to speak the power of mercy and grace, is because it may cost us our position in society. That is what history has proved. If we side with the poor, we may not be accepted by the rich. If we side with the alien and the foreigner, we may be called un-American. If we side with the powerless, we may lose some of our power in this world ourselves. But we will be given more power in God's kingdom. This is a disturbing text. It's a disturbing text because it paints a picture of the world we still live in. And what happens when power is held above all else? For security, for safety, for self-preservation. In God's kingdom, there are no winners or losers. We are just children of God. The root of power is truth and mercy, grace and dignity, hope and love. So what power do we have? And what do we do with it? I thank God that we have been shown the better way of Christ, and that this gospel message is not an isolated text. Who used his power to serve the world. He refused to play into the systems of power in the world. And he tells us all that we are loved and powerful and important. And that in fact, we have more power than Herod ever had. And it's up to us on how we want to use it. Amen.